Emotion is not inherently a weakness, but uncontrolled emotional reaction is a structural liability. The distinction is critical. Emotion, when observed, can inform. Emotion, when acted upon impulsively, transfers control from the individual to the external stimulus. The moment you react without deliberation, you surrender authorship of your behavior. The environment dictates your response. This is not philosophy. It is a measurable exchange of control. Most individuals operate in a reactive state. Stimulus appears, response follows. News triggers outrage. Insults trigger anger. Uncertainty triggers anxiety. The sequence is immediate, automatic, and unexamined. This creates a predictable behavioral pattern, and predictability is exploitable. Any system that can trigger a reliable response can influence behavior at scale. This is the foundation of modern manipulation. Attention systems, media structures, and social environments are optimized not for truth, but for reaction. High arousal content spreads faster. Emotional volatility increases engagement. The individual becomes a node in a feedback loop, receiving stimuli, reacting, and amplifying the same signals that triggered them. The system does not require conscious participation. It only requires responsiveness. When you react, you are no longer operating independently. You are executing a script written by external inputs. Your internal state is being modified in real time, and your actions are adjusted accordingly. This is a loss of autonomy. The cost is not abstract. It can be analyzed through expected value. Consider anger. It narrows focus, reduces cognitive flexibility, and increases impulsivity. Decisions made in anger prioritize immediate expression over long-term outcome. The probability of error increases. The downside risk expands. Relationships are damaged. Opportunities are lost. The short-term reward is the release of tension. The long-term cost is disproportionate. The expected value is negative. Anxiety operates differently, but produces a similar result. It amplifies perceived risk, often beyond objective reality. It leads to avoidance, hesitation, and overcorrection. Decisions become conservative to the point of stagnation. Opportunities with asymmetric upside are rejected due to exaggerated downside perception. The individual protects against unlikely losses while sacrificing probable gains. Again, negative expected value. Outrage follows the same pattern. It is externally triggered, socially reinforced, and rarely productive. It consumes attention, generates noise, and produces minimal actionable output. The individual invests time and energy into reacting, with no corresponding return. The system benefits from engagement. The individual does not. This is the pattern. High emotional reactivity leads to low-quality decisions, reduced control, and negative expected outcomes. The masses remain within this pattern because it is reinforced. Emotional expression is validated socially. Reaction is encouraged. Speed is prioritized over accuracy. The individual is rewarded for responding quickly, not for responding correctly. This creates a behavioral trap. The faster you react, the less you think. The less you think, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you become, the easier you are to influence. The 1% operate under a different protocol. They do not eliminate emotion. They detach from immediate reaction. They insert a buffer between stimulus and response. This buffer is where control exists. Observation replaces reaction. A stimulus appears. It is registered. It is analyzed. It is not immediately acted upon. The individual maintains internal stability while evaluating the external input. This delay is not passive. It is strategic. It allows for assessment of context, probability, and consequence. The question is not, how do I feel about this? The question is, what is the expected value of responding? This shift changes behavior entirely. Most stimuli do not require response. Many are designed specifically to provoke it. By refusing to react, the individual removes themselves from the feedback loop. They conserve attention. They preserve energy. They maintain autonomy. This is not suppression. It is control. Emotional bandwidth is finite. Each reaction consumes a portion of it. When bandwidth is spent on low-value stimuli, it is unavailable for high-value decisions. The individual becomes depleted, not physically, but cognitively. Focus declines. Decision quality deteriorates. The elite treat emotional bandwidth as capital. It is allocated deliberately. They do not spend it on every trigger. They reserve it for situations where response produces measurable return. This creates efficiency. Less reaction, more precision, higher quality decisions. This approach also reduces external influence. When stimuli fail to produce reaction, they lose effectiveness. Systems designed to capture attention through emotional triggers become irrelevant. The individual becomes less responsive to manipulation, not because the stimuli disappear, but because the internal mechanism has changed. This creates asymmetry. While others are reacting, you are observing. While others are engaged emotionally, you are evaluating strategically. This difference compounds over time. Small decisions, made with clarity rather than impulse, produce better outcomes, fewer errors, better positioning, increased stability. The absence of reaction also alters perception. Others cannot easily predict your behavior. You do not respond in expected ways. This reduces their ability to influence or manipulate you. You become less transparent, more controlled. This is not about appearing calm. It is about maintaining operational integrity. In high-pressure environments, this becomes critical. Stress amplifies emotional responses. Most individuals become more reactive under pressure, not less. Their decision-making deteriorates precisely when accuracy is most important. The controlled individual does the opposite. They reduce reaction as pressure increases. They slow down. They analyze more carefully. They prioritize outcome over expression. This creates advantage. Because in environments where others are making errors, the absence of error is sufficient to outperform. Control is not dramatic. It is quiet. It is consistent. It is the repeated decision to observe rather than react, to evaluate rather than express, to act based on expected value rather than emotional impulse. This does not eliminate emotion. It repositions it. Emotion becomes data, not directive. It informs, but does not control. The process is simple, but not easy. It requires awareness of triggers, recognition of internal states, and deliberate interruption of automatic responses. Over time, the gap between stimulus and response increases. Reaction slows. Observation strengthens. Eventually, the default changes. Stimulus no longer dictates behavior. You do. And in a system where most individuals are controlled by what they feel in the moment, the ability to remain unaffected becomes a form of power, not visible, not announced, but decisive. Manipulation does not require force. It requires predictability, and predictability is produced through emotional reactivity. Any system that can reliably trigger anger, fear, or urgency can guide behavior without direct control. This is the architecture of manipulation, a structure built not on coercion, but on engineered response. The modern environment is saturated with stimuli designed to provoke high arousal emotions. Media outlets, algorithmic platforms, and even social groups operate on the same underlying principle. Attention is captured most effectively through intensity. Neutral information is ignored. Calm analysis is overlooked. Content that triggers outrage, fear, or conflict is prioritized, amplified, and distributed. This is not accidental. It is mathematically optimized. Algorithms measure engagement, not accuracy. They track what holds attention, what generates clicks, what produces reactions. Over time, they learn that emotionally charged content outperforms neutral content. As a result, they adjust distribution accordingly. The system does not ask whether the information is useful. It asks whether it is engaging. Engagement is the objective. Emotion is the mechanism. When a piece of content triggers anger, the individual is more likely to respond, comment, share, or continue consuming. Each action feeds back into the system, reinforcing the distribution of similar content. The user becomes both the consumer and the amplifier. The system scales itself through human reaction. Fear operates in the same way. It narrows attention, increases vigilance, and prioritizes immediate information. When individuals are exposed to fear-based stimuli, they seek more input to resolve uncertainty. This increases consumption. The system responds by providing additional stimuli, maintaining the state of heightened attention. The loop is self-sustaining. Stimulus generates emotion. Emotion generates engagement. Engagement trains the system. The system generates more stimulus. At no point is the individual required to consciously agree. Reaction is sufficient. This is where control emerges. If someone can make you angry, they can direct your attention. If they can direct your attention, they can influence your decisions. The content does not need to be accurate. It only needs to be effective in triggering response. Once the emotional state is activated, cognitive evaluation is reduced. The individual is operating in a reactive mode, prioritizing expression over analysis. This reduces resistance. The same mechanism applies in social environments. Peers do not need formal systems to influence behavior. They rely on emotional triggers. Approval, disapproval, comparison, and subtle pressure create reactions that guide decisions. The individual adjusts behavior to avoid discomfort or to gain validation, often without conscious awareness. The structure remains consistent. Stimulus, reaction, adjustment. Over time, this creates behavioral alignment with the surrounding environment, not through deliberate choice, but through repeated emotional response. The individual becomes synchronized with external signals, responding automatically to changes in tone, opinion, or expectation. This is efficient for the system. It is inefficient for the individual. Because control is externalized, the critical vulnerability is immediacy. The faster the reaction, the less space exists for evaluation. Manipulation relies on speed. It compresses the timeline between stimulus and response, reducing the opportunity for reflection. The individual is pushed into action before analysis can occur. The solution is not resistance at the level of content. It is intervention at the level of process. This is where the observer effect becomes functional. The observer effect, in this context, is not a physical principle, but a cognitive strategy. It is the act of stepping back and viewing your own emotional response as an external data point rather than as an instruction. Instead of identifying with the emotion, you analyze it. A stimulus appears. An emotion is triggered. Instead of reacting, you observe. What is this response? Why is it occurring? What action does it attempt to produce? This creates separation. The emotion is no longer the controller of behavior. It becomes an object of analysis. This shift reduces its intensity, not because the stimulus changes, but because the relationship to it changes. Emotion without identification loses authority. It is still present, but it does not dictate action. This is the interruption of the manipulation loop. When the observer state is active, the sequence is altered. Stimulus generates emotion. Emotion is observed. Observation delays response. Delay allows evaluation. Evaluation determines action. the system loses its immediate control. This delay is critical. It reintroduces time into the process. Time allows for context. Context allows for rational assessment. The individual regains the ability to calculate expected value, to determine whether responding produces any benefit. In most cases, it does not. Outrage produces no asset. Fear-based consumption produces no leverage. Reactive behavior produces no long-term advantage. Once this is recognized consistently, the incentive to react decreases. The individual begins to disengage from low-value stimuli. Attention is no longer captured automatically. It is allocated deliberately. This changes the relationship with the environment. Content designed to provoke loses effectiveness. It fails to generate engagement. The individual becomes less visible to the system, less predictable, less responsive. Algorithms have less data to optimize against. Social pressure has less influence. This is not disengagement from reality. It is selective engagement. Information is still processed, but without emotional distortion. Decisions are made based on utility, not intensity. The individual interacts with the environment on their own terms, rather than reacting to its signals. This creates stability. While others are oscillating between emotional states, responding to each new stimulus, the controlled individual remains consistent. Their behavior is not dictated by external volatility. This consistency improves decision quality. It reduces error. It preserves cognitive resources. Over time, the advantage compounds. Fewer impulsive decisions, more strategic actions. Less wasted attention, more controlled output. The architecture of manipulation remains in place. It does not disappear. Systems will continue to optimize for engagement. Peers will continue to apply pressure. Stimuli will continue to appear. The difference is internal. The mechanism that converts stimulus into reaction has been modified. Emotion is no longer a trigger. It is a signal. And signals can be ignored or acted upon selectively. This is control. Not the elimination of influence, but the refusal to be directed by it. In a system designed to capture attention through emotional response, the ability to observe without reacting is a structural advantage. It removes you from the equation. And once you are no longer part of the feedback loop, the system loses its leverage. Because it cannot control what it cannot move. Chaos is not inherently destructive. It is selective. It exposes weakness. It amplifies instability. And it redistributes opportunity. Most individuals interpret chaos as danger. The 1% interpret it as a filter. The difference is not in the external event. It is in the internal response. When systems destabilize, markets fluctuate, or uncertainty increases, the environment becomes emotionally charged. Fear spreads rapidly, not because of objective reality, but because of collective reaction. Individuals observe others, panicking, and mirror the same behavior. This creates feedback loops where perception drives action, and action reinforces perception. Price drops trigger fear. Fear triggers selling. Selling accelerates the drop. The loop sustains itself. At no point is the process governed by pure logic. It is governed by emotional contagion. The majority do not evaluate situations independently. They respond to signals generated by others, and in doing so, they amplify volatility. This is where asymmetry emerges. While the masses react, a minority observes. While the majority seeks safety, a minority calculates probability. While panic spreads, a controlled individual remains unchanged. This stability is not passive, it is strategic. It allows for action when others are incapacitated by emotion. Emotional control in this context becomes a financial weapon, because chaos does not eliminate value, it misprices it. Assets do not lose intrinsic worth instantly. They become discounted due to fear-driven behavior. The individual who detaches from emotional noise can identify these discrepancies and act when expected value shifts in their favor. The masses sell low, the controlled individual accumulates. This pattern repeats across every cycle of instability. Market crashes, economic downturns, systemic shocks follow similar structures. Emotional participants exit positions to reduce discomfort. Logical participants enter positions to exploit mispricing. The outcome is predictable. Transfer of value from those who react to those who remain controlled. This requires a specific mental structure. Understanding the pattern is insufficient. Execution must align with it. When fear is highest, action feels most difficult. The body resists. The mind searches for confirmation. The individual is pulled towards safety rather than opportunity. This is where detachment becomes necessary. Detachment is not indifference. It is separation from outcome-based emotion. The individual does not anchor identity to immediate results, does not interpret short-term fluctuations as personal success or failure, operates based on probability and process. A decision is made not because it feels correct, but because it is statistically favorable. The outcome may vary in the short term. This is accepted in advance. The individual does not react to each fluctuation, remains aligned with the original logic unless new data invalidates it. This is execution without emotional interference. Most individuals cannot sustain this approach. They are outcome dependent. A negative result triggers doubt. Doubt triggers adjustment. Adjustment breaks the system. Over time, inconsistency replaces strategy. Consistency produces reliability. Reliability produces advantage. In chaotic environments, this advantage is amplified. While others change behavior constantly, the controlled individual remains stable. They do not chase trends, do not respond to headlines, operate within a predefined framework. This allows for clarity. Clarity allows for speed. Speed combined with accuracy creates leverage. Opportunities during chaos are time-sensitive. Mispricing exists in the gap between emotional reaction and rational correction. The individual who acts within this window captures value. The individual who hesitates loses it. Hesitation is driven by fear. Fear is driven by attachment. Attachment is the constraint. When outcomes are tied to identity, every decision carries emotional weight. Loss is not only financial, it becomes psychological. This amplifies risk perception and reduces willingness to act. Detachment removes this burden. A loss is data. A gain is data. Neither defines the individual, both inform the system. This perspective transforms behavior. Decisions become cleaner. Execution becomes faster. Recovery from error becomes immediate. The individual does not carry emotional residue from previous outcomes. Each action is independent, evaluated on its own merit. This is critical in volatile environments because volatility increases the frequency of decision points. More decisions create more opportunities for error. Emotional participants accumulate mistakes. Controlled participants maintain precision. Over time, the difference compounds. The concept extends beyond financial markets. Chaos exists in business. Industries shift, systems evolve, structures change. In each case, instability creates openings. The majority withdraws or reacts defensively. A minority advances strategically. They identify inefficiencies, allocate resources, build systems while others are distracted. This is the asymmetric advantage, not created by chaos, but revealed by it. Chaos does not change capability. It exposes it. Those who rely on stable conditions deteriorate when conditions shift. Those who operate on internal control remain consistent regardless of environment. Performance is not dependent on external stability. This creates adaptability. Adaptation is the highest form of advantage. Not strength, not speed, but the ability to function under changing conditions without loss of effectiveness. Emotional control enables this. It removes dependence on external signals, stabilizes internal state, allows continuous execution even when the environment is unstable. The final layer is acceptance. Chaos cannot be eliminated, cannot be predicted with precision. It can only be prepared for. Preparation is not forecasting events. It is structuring the individual to respond effectively regardless of outcome. This includes maintaining liquidity, preserving optionality, avoiding overexposure to single points of failure. These are strategic decisions made before chaos appears. When instability arrives, the individual is not forced into reaction. Capacity to act already exists. This is the difference between being positioned and being exposed. The masses are exposed, they react. The controlled individual is positioned, they execute. Each action is evaluated based on expected value. Each risk is defined in advance. Each decision aligns with long-term strategy. Emotion is removed from the equation, not because it does not exist, but because it is not allowed to interfere. In a system where most participants are driven by fear and impulse, the absence of these variables creates a structural edge. It is not visible, not announced, but it determines outcome. Because when chaos arrives, the question is not what is happening externally. The question is whether you remain the same internally. If the answer is yes, then chaos is not a threat. It is leverage. The protocol of the gap begins with a simple observation. Stimulus and response are not the same event. Between them exists a space, and within that space lies control. Most individuals never access it because their responses are immediate, automatic, and conditioned. The stimulus appears, the reaction follows. There is no interruption, no evaluation, no choice. This is not behavior, it is reflex. Control begins when the reflex is broken. The concept is precise. A stimulus is external. An insult, a loss, a failure, a sudden change in environment. The response is internal, emotional activation, followed by action. The gap is the interval where the stimulus has been registered, but the response has not yet been executed. This interval is small, often measured in seconds, but it is sufficient. Within it, power exists. Not theoretical power, but operational control over behavior. The problem is that this gap is undeveloped. It is compressed by habit. Years of reactive behavior reduce the delay between stimulus and response to near zero. The individual becomes predictable, and predictability eliminates control. The objective is to expand this gap, to create enough separation to allow conscious decision-making to override automatic reaction. This is trained, not assumed. The first step is recognition. You identify the moment of activation. The physiological signals appear before the response. Increased heart rate, tension, a shift in breathing, a surge of internal pressure. These are indicators that a stimulus has triggered an emotional pattern. Most individuals ignore these signals and move directly into reaction. The controlled individual does the opposite. They pause, not as hesitation, but as intervention. The pause is the insertion of space. It interrupts the automatic sequence. It prevents immediate discharge of emotion into action. This alone changes the outcome. The intensity of the emotion begins to decay the moment it is not expressed. What feels overwhelming in the first second becomes manageable in the next. This is the leverage of time. Once the pause is established, observation begins. The emotion is identified, not as identity, but as data. Anger is present. Anxiety is present. Frustration is present. The language is precise. You are not angry. Anger exists within the system. This distinction removes identification. When identification is removed, control increases. The next step is evaluation. The question is not what you feel, but what action produces the highest expected value. This reframes the situation entirely. An insult no longer demands retaliation. It becomes a variable. A loss no longer triggers panic. it becomes information. A failure no longer produces avoidance, it becomes feedback. This is the shift from reaction to strategy. Most responses fail this evaluation. Emotional reactions provide immediate relief, but create long-term cost. Responding to an insult may satisfy ego, but damages positioning. Reacting to a loss may reduce discomfort, but locks in negative outcome. Avoiding failure may protect identity, but prevents growth. The expected value is negative. The controlled individual rejects these responses. They select actions based on outcome, not impulse. Silence instead of argument. Adjustment instead of panic. Iteration instead of withdrawal. These responses are not natural, they are constructed. They require training. The gap must be exercised repeatedly until it becomes default. This is done in real environments, not controlled conditions. An insult is received, a pause is applied, observation follows. No immediate response is given. The urge to react is present. It is ignored. The individual maintains composure, not as performance, but as control. The moment passes. The system stabilizes. The response, if any, is delivered later, calculated, and precise. A loss occurs, financial or otherwise, the same protocol applies. No immediate action, no emotional liquidation. Data is reviewed, variables are analyzed, adjustments are made based on logic. The individual remains aligned with process, not outcome. Failure appears, the system does not collapse. The gap is used to prevent identity attachment. The event is isolated, examined, and integrated into the next iteration. There is no dramatization, no narrative, only correction. Each repetition strengthens the structure. The gap expands. Reaction slows. Control increases. Over time, the default changes. Stimulus no longer triggers immediate response. There is always a delay, always an evaluation, always a choice. The individual becomes less predictable, less reactive, more stable. This stability creates advantage. Because while others are governed by impulse, the controlled individual operates on calculation. Their actions are not influenced by external volatility. They remain consistent across environments. This consistency improves decision quality and reduces error. The distinction becomes visible in outcomes. Fewer unnecessary conflicts, fewer impulsive decisions, more strategic positioning, more efficient execution. This is not emotional suppression. Suppression stores pressure and releases it later. Control processes emotion in real time without allowing it to dictate behavior. The emotion is acknowledged, analyzed, and integrated, not expressed impulsively. This requires discipline, not occasional, but constant. Every stimulus is an opportunity to reinforce or weaken the system. Each reaction strengthens the old pattern. Each controlled response strengthens the new one. There is no neutral state. You are either training control or reinforcing reactivity. The conclusion is direct. Emotional reactions are inefficient. They produce low-quality outcomes. They reduce control. They increase predictability. They are liabilities. Calculated responses are efficient. They maximize expected value. They preserve control. They create asymmetry. They are assets. The difference between the two is the gap. And the gap is trainable, so the protocol is simple. Notice the activation. Pause. Observe. Evaluate. Act with precision. Repeat. There is no complexity beyond execution. No external requirement. No dependency on environment. Only control over response. Master this, and external conditions lose influence. Fail to master it, and external conditions dictate behavior. The instruction is final. Slow down the response. Expand the gap. Remove the impulse. Replace it with calculation. Absorb the insult without movement. Absorb the loss without panic. Absorb the failure without collapse. Then act not as a reaction, but as a decision, controlled, deliberate, exact. Close the noise. Silence the impulse. Master the space between stimulus and response. And build without announcement, without distraction, without emotional leakage. If you want more systems like this, more frameworks built on control, asymmetry, and execution, subscribe to Asymmetric Edge, where the focus is not on reaction, but on power, not on emotion, but on precision, and not on noise, but on results.